It's Friday, you know what that means? Time to talk about yet another wrestling game. So many games for me to talk about. How about Smackdown vs. Raw? Let's pop the disc in and... I think something's wrong with my Smackdown vs. Raw. This is Rumble Roses, a wrestling game all about, well, yeah, I don't even have to tell you, the game speaks for itself. Now, surprisingly, the game was developed by none other than Konami. Yeah, that Konami. The same Konami that's known for games like Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, and Frogger made this game. I think what makes it even weirder is that Yuke's, the people behind a good majority of the WWE games during the 2000s, like Smackdown vs. Raw and Here Comes the Pain, actually supplied Konami with the engine that was used for Here Comes the Pain due to Konami just really wanting a wrestling game. Then just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, Rumble Roses was released on November 9th, 2004, just 7 days after the release of Smackdown vs. Raw, which meant if you were walking into GameStop in November of 2004, you were either there to pick up Smackdown vs. Raw, or you were walking out of that GameStop feeling nothing but shame. Yeah, one copy of Rumble Roses, please. Now, if you're wondering just what the hell Rumble Roses is exactly, just imagine Smackdown vs. Raw, but all the women were half naked and the only matches available were bra and panties and Fulfill Your Fantasy. That's pretty much what Rumble Roses is at its core. If you've ever wanted to play a wrestling game with jiggle physics and ass galore, Rumble Roses has you covered. The biggest difference between SVR and Rumble Roses, though, is that SVR is pretty straightforward and takes itself relatively seriously, while Rumble Roses just kinda does whatever the hell it wants. Alright, this girl is making her entrance, and I mean, she looks pretty nice. This game looks pretty good for 2004 standards. Is that a fucking horse? Even the damn trailer for this game was over the top and nonsensical. All the trailer is just some guy watching his girlfriend and some other girl fight. Alright, cool trailer, but for some reason, they felt the need to use the Hardy Boys theme as the song in the trailer. I'm not joking. They legitimately used the Hardy Boys theme in the trailer, and I can't tell you why. Hell, they might as well just put the Hardy Boys in the damn game at that point. Now, as far as the game itself goes, if I'm gonna be 100% honest, and I know I'm gonna sound like the biggest gooner in the world when I say this, but Rumble Roses isn't all that bad. For what it's worth, it's actually a pretty enjoyable wrestling game. The gameplay is pretty fun, the characters are fairly interesting, and it has a full story mode with cutscenes and a fair amount of effort put into it. The game even starts with this pretty good looking animated cinematic that tells you everything you need to know about the game as far as the characters and wrestling goes. With all that out of the way though, I think it's time I finally talk about Rumble Roses because it's not like anybody else is going to. The first thing I want to talk about regarding Rumble Roses is the gameplay, because like I said earlier, it's honestly not that bad. It's incredibly polished and pretty fun all around. It kind of reminds me of something like Tekken or Dead or Alive with how it's set up. It feels more like a full-on fighting game than a wrestling game, but because you're able to do submissions and have to win matches by pinfall, I think it's safe to say that this does in fact classify as a wrestling game. Thankfully, the actual wrestling in this game feels really nice and pretty smooth. The striking is incredibly fast, and because of this, it means you're able to pull off some pretty sick combos on your opponent. This is very much an arcade-style wrestling game, which is about what you would expect from a game like this. It's incredibly fun though, especially when you're playing with friends. The already fun gameplay gets even better when you start using weapons, because they're really fun to use in this game. Now, thankfully, this game doesn't feature a referee, so that of course means that every match is a no DQ match, which means you can use weapons all you'd like without having to worry about the match getting thrown out, which is just awesome. The weapons themselves, like I said, are incredibly fun to use and do a good job of shaking up the gameplay and making it more interesting. Speaking of shaking, the biggest feature in this game is, of course, oh my god, the amount of times the game will just pan the camera to show off the tits and ass on a character is insane. It's like most of the budget went into working on the jiggle physics, so Konami had to show them off as much as possible to get their money's worth. Well, with all that out of the way, we might as well talk about the other big feature in the game, the finishing moves, or killer moves as they're called in this game. These are more like signature moves than anything, but with how deadly some of the killer moves look, it's no wonder why they're called killer moves to begin with. Killer moves are obtained from beating the shit out of your opponent, and when you activate one, you first see a close-up shot of your character, almost as if it's an anime or something, and then you hit the move on your opponent. There's also lethal moves, which are what I would consider to be the finishers in this game, as the lethal moves feel much bigger and more impactful than the killer moves. Alongside lethal and killer moves, there's also humiliation moves, which honestly aren't really all that special. Once you fill up your opponent's heart meter by beating them up enough, you're able to humiliate them, and all that means is you get to put them in a special type of submission move that makes them tap out, in turn humiliating them. Like I said, they're not really all that special. Now moving on to the match types, there really isn't that many options, which kind of sucks because I think this game really could have gone all out with the wackiness and added in some pretty crazy match types. The only matches we have available though are normal matches, mud matches, and title matches. Unfortunately, title matches are single player only, which means as far as local multiplayer goes, your only options are the mud matches and normal matches. Not like it matters anyway, since there's only one championship in the entire game, so you'd only be able to defend the title against your friends so many times before it'd get repetitive. As far as the other matches go, normal matches are pretty self-explanatory, but what the hell is a mud match? I promise it's not as exciting as it sounds. All it is, at its core, is a normal match just with a giant mud pit in the middle of the stage, and the girls wear swimsuits instead of their regular wrestling attire. The mud match is bare bones and dumb, but then again, a mud match isn't something you see super often in wrestling games, and it can still be pretty fun to drown your opponent in mud, so it gets a pass. Honestly though, that's really about it when it comes to the gameplay. For an arcade wrestling game, the gameplay works perfectly fine, and you can get quite a bit of fun out of it. So the gameplay is pretty good, but what about the roster? Well, at first glance, it may seem like there's a ton of different characters to choose from, but once you look a little closer, you'll soon realize that a lot of the characters are actually the same person in a different costume. Yeah, the way this game handles its roster is pretty unique, as it splits each character into two separate characters, with one version of them being their face version and the other being their heel alter ego. It's honestly a really cool concept that I don't think I've ever seen replicated in another wrestling game before. Now say all you want about the alter ego thing just being an excuse for Konami to copy and paste the same characters to fill up the roster easier, but I really don't think that's what's going on here. Sure, the heel alter ego of a character will have the same moveset as the face version of that character, but as far as the entrances go, both heels and faces have their own unique entrances, which is pretty awesome. Now in terms of the characters themselves, I think some of my favorites include the alter ego of Rose, just because she looks like Daredevil, Sergeant Clements because she comes out on a motorcycle like The Undertaker, and Lady X because she just looks badass and comes out in a comically long limo. Jesus Christ, why is it so long? That's what she said. Overall, everything about this game's gameplay is pretty solid. I think what makes this game so good is that it doesn't take itself seriously whatsoever. It knows what it is and doesn't try to be anything more than that. Now, is it the greatest wrestling game of all time? No, of course not, but for what it's worth, I think it's fine and pretty enjoyable. If all you want is a dumb arcade wrestling game to play with a friend, this game gets the job done. It's over the top and it's just dumb fun, so if you haven't played this game yet, I highly suggest seeking out a means to play it because it's damn entertaining. Speaking of entertaining, this game has a story mode, and it's a whole lot better than you'd expect it to be. This game's story mode not only has voice acting, but fully animated cutscenes as well, which is not what you would expect from a dumb arcade wrestling game like this one. As for the story itself, it's not the greatest story ever told in a wrestling game, but for what it's worth, it ain't half bad. Hey, I said it was better than you'd expect. I didn't say it'd blow your socks off. The story centers around a tournament known as Rumble Roses. The tournament sees women from all around the world competing in order to become the Rose of Roses champion. Lame ass name for a championship if you ask me, but whatever. Essentially, all you do is pick a superstar, hear them talk about why they entered the tournament at the start of the story mode, compete in a series of matches, take down Lady X, who just so happens to be the final boss, and just like that, the story ends. The story for each superstar is incredibly short, each of which maybe being an hour long, but the game really relies on you playing through each character's story to get the full experience. Plus, once you play through the story of one character, you end up unlocking unlocking their alter ego story, which is always vastly different from their first story. All in all, it's a pretty good story mode, all things considered. Now, that's something I would tell you to go out and play if you haven't played this game's story mode. No, but if you're ever bored and have literally nothing else to do, there's worse ways to spend your time. Overall, Rumble Roses is a pretty good time. The gameplay is wacky and over the top, the story is just wild, and the characters, while being way too over-sexualized, are pretty interesting in of themselves. This game had a pretty kick-ass soundtrack too, which really adds to the fun of the game. Now, believe it or not, Rumble Roses would go on to get a sequel in 2006 on the Xbox 360 titled Rumble Roses XX, which I heard was actually pretty good. I've never played it, but who knows, maybe one day I'll give it a try. Well, if Rumble Roses XX was so good, I can't wait to see what the third game has in store. What the fuck?